The Cellar. The Matterhorn Bobsled opened on June 14, 1959, in Disneyland, which is located in Anaheim, California. The Matterhorn Bobsleds are a pair of intertwined steel roller coasters that are modeled after the Matterhorn, a mountain located in the Alps on the border between Switzerland and Italy. It is the first known tubular steel track roller coaster. The ride itself consists of two separate tracks that run parallel to each other for most of the ride. They then intertwine and eventually deviate from one another at the loading areas. The two tracks are called the Fantasyland track and Tomorrowland track, these names stemming from which side of the mountains their loading lines begin. The vehicles originally held up to 4 passengers each, seated single file. But in 1978, after an upgrade was completed, the individual vehicles were joined into pairs with lap seating, which increased the ride's capacity to 8 people per train. The safety restraints on the ride consist of a car seatbelt. There are hand grips inside the cars. Padding within the cars is very limited, and the winding track has many sharp turns. This leads to a bone-shaking ride, reminiscent of an actual bobsled. There is one lift hill on each track. The bobsleds ascend parallel to each other at the start of the ride, climbing past walls featuring snow-like special effects. The top of this lift hill constitutes the highest point of the ride itself, though the mountain continues upward for several more stories. The rest of the ride is a mostly unpowered coast through the Matterhorn's many caverns and passageways. Mark Maples was a 15-year-old teenager who lived with his parents in Long Beach, California. Long Beach is a city in Los Angeles County, California, United States. It is the 43rd most populous city in all of the United States, with a population of around 451,000 residents. It was May 15, 1964, and Mark Maples was enjoying a trip to Disneyland with classmates and friends of his. It was grad night for Stanford Junior High School, and to celebrate, the school had rented out part of the Disneyland park after it closed for the day. From my research, this is a common thing that Southern California schools used to do. At around midnight, Mark Maples boarded the Matterhorn Bobsled ride with some classmates of his. It is still unclear what exactly happened, but based on eyewitness accounts and the investigation that took place after the incident, it is believed that during the ride, some sort of bet or dare potentially took place. One of Mark's friends would unbuckle Mark's seatbelt as the Matterhorn sled was about to reach its highest point. The sled was running at around 20 miles per hour at that time. It was at this point that Mark Maples stood up in his seat. This daring decision would end up being a grave mistake for Mark, as he would lose his balance in the process. It is believed that Mark may have hit his head on the side of the mountain while standing up. Now, I have seen differing reports as to what exactly happened to Mark. Some reports say he fell out of the coaster some distance to the ground below, while others believe he hit his head while on the coaster and simply fell out no more than a foot away from where the track was. Either way, Mark was in a bad way following the incident. When the ride would come to an end, Mark's friends would tell ride operators what occurred, but at first they were not believed. After numerous minutes of pleading and trying to convince park workers, the ride was finally shut down and the search for Mark was underway. Mark's body would be found along the track, and emergency personnel would be called to the scene, and Mark would be rushed to the nearby Palm Harbor Hospital. Once there at the hospital, numerous tests were performed to determine the extent of damage that Mark had suffered. Mark had numerous broken ribs and a fractured skull. As Mark fought for his life in the hospital, police began questioning witnesses, trying to piece together what exactly took place. Disney would put out an official statement after the incident saying that Mark unbuckled his safety restraint and stood up on the bobsled as it was entering the summit. The belief was that upon standing, Mark hit his head on the inside of the tunnel and was simply thrown from within the sled. Further interviews with classmates and witnesses brought forth different ideas and details of what transpired. Some believed that Mark was trying to impress his girlfriend, while others thought that one of Mark's friends undid his seatbelt as a prank. The chief deputy would later state that he had received calls claiming that this was a hazing incident gone wrong. No matter where the truth lies, Mark would fight for his life in the hospital for 3 days. But sadly, the young 15-year-old would succumb to his injuries. Ultimately, investigators would end up ruling the death as accidental. Mark Maples would end up being the very first death at Disneyland. He was also the very first to die riding the Matterhorn Bobsled, but he would not be the last. On January 3, 1984, 48-year-old Dolly Young, a resident of California, was visiting Disneyland with a small group of friends. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, Dolly and her friends would get in line and eventually board the Matterhorn Bobsleds. Dolly would end up sitting in the very back of the bobsled by herself, while her 4 friends sat in pairs in the seats just in front of her. The roughly 70-second ride would begin, and not long into it, another guest on the ride would witness something straight out of a Final Destination horror film. A woman named Helen witnessed Dolly Young fall out of the Matterhorn bobsled. Dolly would go crashing onto another part of the ride's track below. It was said that after Dolly fell, she made an effort to get herself up on the track, but in an instant, another one of the ride's bobsleds would go crashing straight into Dolly. Upon impact, Dolly would be decapitated, and the bobsled would come to a stop on top of what was left of her body. With the bobsled now being stopped, the ride operators would get an alert and immediately shut down the ride in its entirety. Emergency services would be called, and Dolly Young was pronounced dead at the scene. The Anaheim police would immediately start an investigation into what transpired on this fateful day. Unlike a lot of other stories I've told on the channel, the investigation would find no mechanical issues whatsoever with the ride. The only thing that was found was that Dolly Young's seatbelt was undone, but not broken in any way. Disneyland officials would immediately go on to state that prior to the start of the ride, seatbelts are checked on every passenger, not just once, but twice. In stark contrast, one of Dolly's friends was quoted later as saying that they had never checked her seatbelt prior to beginning the ride. To this day, the truth is not 100% apparent. Did Dolly take off her seatbelt herself while on the ride, or did someone forget to check and make sure she was secure prior to the ride beginning? Dolly's family would eventually sue the park for $5 million. This resulted in an undisclosed settlement in March of 1988. Dolly Young was the 5th person to die at Disneyland, and according to my research, as of 2023, 27 people total have lost their lives at the park, but only 7 of those fatalities occurred on rides themselves. As always, my deepest condolences go out to both Mark Maples and Dolly Young, and to anyone who has ever lost someone due to an amusement park accident. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. Also, if you want to make sure you never miss a new upload, you can turn on the bell notification after you've subscribed. Also, in the description box below, you will find a link to my merch store and a link to the Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. It's only $2.99 a month, and if you're interested, please take a moment to go check those things out. If you'd like to submit your own scary story or any kind of story recommendation, you can do so using the email that I have linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to support the channel is greatly appreciated. And until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.